It's a very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and to you, our viewers and listeners. Listeners on 3FM 92.7, Onia 95.1 FM, Akoma 87.9, and Connect 97.1 in Takrady. So, on Saturday, the Special Chamber of the International Tribunal on Laws of the Sea ruled in the maritime border dispute between Ghana and La Côte d'Ivoire. Many of you have been asking yourself these questions. What does it mean at all? And what was the whole conflict about in the first place? Well, this morning we are here to make sense of that judgment, and that's how come we're seated here this morning. My name is Winston Amwa, and I am your moderator. But before we get into know who our guest speaker is, who'll be making sense of everything about the judgment, shall we, with a round of applause, welcome the GM in charge of News of Media General, Joseph Warungu, as he officially welcomes us.
Thank you very much indeed. Welcome everyone. On behalf of the Group CEO and management of Media General, I'd like to welcome you to this special public lecture. My name is Joseph Warungu, formerly of the BBC, now General Manager for News here at Media General, and it's really a pleasure to welcome you this morning to this program. This is the start of a series of very high-profile discussions that we shall be conducting going forwards. We'll be grabbing an issue that is of national interest in the worlds of business, finance, politics, culture, sport, and really getting to grips with the key players, people who understand it, so that we can just give a little bit more context to our audiences across all our platforms on some of the issues that they have to grapple with on a day-to-day basis. So we're really privileged to have our key guests here and other experts and and speakers who will engage on this discussion. And you can expect to see and hear more of this kind of high-level discussions as we go forwards. Very soon we will be celebrating our 20th anniversary of TV3. And there too will be a few more things to look forward to on our TV station as well as on all our 4 radio stations. So I just want to welcome you all on behalf of management and to say let's enjoy this discussion, and we hope you can join us even in future events. So on behalf of us all, welcome Akwaba.
Thank you very much, Joseph Warungu. And so we are particularly grateful for the presence of our speaker, Dr. Kofi Mbia, who is immediate past chairman of the International Maritime Organization's Legal Committee. And the chairman for this occasion is one man that we all know. Justice Emil Short was born in Cape Coast in 1943. Now he's been the commissioner of the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice. In 2004, he was elected by the United Nations General Assembly after being nominated by government to serve as a judge on the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, which was set up in Arusha, Tanzania. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for joining us. And I'll now ask you to address all of us briefly.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a pleasure to be asked to chair this lecture, and my delight stems not from the outcome of the verdict, because this lecture was scheduled even before the verdict was read. But my delight stems from the fact that it's an important national topic, and the law of the sea is not something that is very well known. Some might even wonder that it's a subject like the law of the sea. So, but for the time being, without much ado, my duty is to introduce the speaker. I might have an opportunity to say a few words afterwards. The speaker, as you've already been told, is Dr. Mbia. He holds a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Ghana, Legon, and is a barrister at law from the Ghana School of Law. He holds a master's degree in marine management from Dalhousie University, Canada, and a Master of Laws degree from the IMLI, where he graduated with distinction and was the recipient of the IMO Secretary General's Prize for Best Overall Performance. Earlier this year, he obtained another master's degree in business administration from the Ghana Institute of GIMPA. He also has a PhD degree in maritime administration from the World Maritime University in Sweden, which he obtained in 2011. He started his working career at the Ghana Shippers Authority in 1982 as an assistant legal officer and rose through the ranks to become the CEO in 1999, a position he still holds. Dr. Mbia was the vice chairman of the IMO Legal Committee for 11 years until his election in 2010 to chairman of the committee, a position he still holds. Apart from participating in the development of various IMO instruments and signing them on behalf of Ghana, Dr. Mbia has also contributed to the work of the IMO. He was the chairman of the drafting committee for the protocol to the Athens Convention, 2002, chairman of the drafting committee to the protocol on the International Convention on Liability and Compensation for Damage in connection with the carriage of hazardous and noxious substances by sea 2010, and one of the vice presidents of the diplomatic conference for the adoption of the Nairobi International Convention on the removal of wrecks 2007. He was elected the chairman of Committee 1, which deals with administrative, financial, legal, and technical cooperation matters at the 29th session of the General Assembly of the IMO, held at the IMO headquarters from November 23 to December 2nd, 2015. He has also served on various subcommittees and working groups in furtherance of the work of the IMO. I wish to observe also that over the past weekend, as recently as this weekend, on the day of this important judgment, Dr. Kofi Mbia was in Nigeria, where some key players in the Nigeria maritime and petroleum sector conferred on him an award for his outstanding leadership in this field. We have someone who is very knowledgeable and is in a very good position to clarify the judgment for us. So it's my pleasure to introduce the speaker for today's lecture, Dr. Mbia.
Thank you very much, Justice Short, and good morning to you all. I would like to make one or two clarifications. I'm sure all of this CV was taken from the internet. So some of it certainly must be outdated. I had an introduction which said that a position he still holds, that is as Chief Executive of the Ghana Shippers Authority. I wish to say that I'm no longer the Chief Executive of the Ghana Shippers Authority. I've exited. And then also it was said that I am still the chairman of the legal committee. In fact, I'm the outgoing chairman of the legal committee. We elected a new chairman, and my tenure will end in December. So I'm the outgoing chairman of the legal committee. I think I need to make those corrections before I usurp, some positions of others. I thank you very much for having me here. When I was informed that we needed to do something about the judgment of ITLOS, I was very concerned as to whether I would be able to bring this down so that people can understand. If I were talking to maybe lawyers, it may be a little different, but when I'm talking to a wide mass of people who maybe listening from all corners and all angles, it's important for me to try and bring this down as much as possible. I must say that within the province of maritime law, one of the most complex areas has to do with maritime boundary delimitation. And I will therefore try as much as possible to break down some of the key elements of this judgment. I think it's important, first and foremost, to look at a little bit of history. So by way of introduction, I would just quickly indicate that boundary delimitation is... Okay. Boundary delimitation is indeed a very, very important aspect of maritime law. and it has come into vogue in recent times, even more so because of the resources of the seabed. All of this emanated way back in the Truman Declaration. So for me to look at maritime boundary delimitation is first and foremost important for us to cast our minds and look at the globe and see, we can imagine and we can picture that there is a map of the world and the boundaries are all drawn, so you can tell the boundary between Ghana and Togo, you can tell between America and Canada, etc. We can see all of that on the globe. Unfortunately, when you go out there to sea, we have not done such mapping, and therefore boundary delimitation is an issue for many countries. There is a tendency for sometimes for people to confuse the delimitation of maritime zones as against maritime spaces. The maritime zones are delimited by law, and so very quickly I would say that when you ask anybody who is a student of the law of the sea, he will tell you that we have our internal waters, everyone knows it. Then we have our territorial seas, 12 nautical miles, the contiguous zone, 24 nautical miles. We have the 200 nautical mile EEZ, and then we have the high seas, and then we have the continental shelf that is beneath. So that is known, that is determined under UNCLOS, and it's very clear. But when we come to talk about the maritime spaces, then we are talking about overlaps in terms of the boundary. And the land boundary then becomes an important point for determining the boundary in the sea. In fact, in earlier decisions of the International Court of Justice, it has pointed out that the land dominates the sea. And so all of it starts from the land, and that is where you start from. Maritime boundary delimitation, the first thing to note basically is that it is to be by agreement of the parties, the countries concerned. So that as between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, or Ghana and Togo, or any two countries, the first thing is you need to agree on the boundaries. And if there is such an agreement, then indeed you have no issues, because the two parties have agreed and they can formalize that agreement. So agreement is at the starting point of all of these. And that is one thing we should know, agreement. It's important for me to mention also that, as Lord Curzon has mentioned, it is such a thin line on which hang war and peace. Suspended on this thin thread is war and peace, because this could lead to war because of, especially today, the resources of the sea. Way back in around 1958, when the first conventions of UNCLOS were being formulated, the issues of the resources, even though prevalent, were not that pronounced. I mean, if you take Ghana, we've been exploring for oil for so many years. But today, technology has made it possible that we can go as far as 64 kilometers into the sea, about 2 kilometers down into the belly of the oceans, and then be able to find oil. So that technology has made delimitation important. And so if there is any significance at all to what we are saying today, the fact is that today we are talking about resources. And no country can thrive without resources. Either it has it or it has the capacity to be able to buy it. So the resources are very important. And I think it's also important for me at the very onset to mention, as was said by Frost, that good fences make good neighbors. Because I know people have been concerned whether indeed it was appropriate for us to go to ITLOS, etc. And I say to them that good fences make good neighbors. It's important that we draw our line between ourselves and Cote d'Ivoire. Once that line has been drawn, then it becomes a matter of negotiation between us as to what we want to do next. But at least we know our fences, and that is important. What I'll try to do is maybe look at the outline. Look at the outline of what the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea has done. But again, as part of my introduction, it must be borne in mind that because there is the need for the two parties to reach agreement, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire had been at it. And Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire had met over about 10 different meetings over a period of about 6 years. Unfortunately, it could not lead to an agreement. Ghana had always presumed that, well, because of certain things we have done over the period and the fact that Côte d'Ivoire had not opposed some of these things over the period, then we could conveniently say that there is a line which the two parties tacitly agree on. So if you look at Ghana's legal position, which I will start with, and which the court looked at, the first position, and sometimes we think it's a win or lose. You know, I don't like to use win or lose. I remember I did a program before the judgment, and I indicated that when I look at the position of the law and I look at the cases over the period, my strong inclination is that the judgment will go in favor of Ghana. And then I saw later on a headline, Ghana will win, Dr. Kofi Mbia. I never said that Ghana will win. I have a friend in Côte d'Ivoire who called me immediately and said, why, is it a win or lose affair? You know, and I tell people it's not a win or lose affair. At the end of the day, you would come to realize, when we go into the detail of it, that Ghana got lesser amount of water than Côte d'Ivoire. And I'll come to explain the differences and what it means to us. But let me look at the way in which the tribunal itself considered the matters that were before it. Firstly, remember that Ghana says there is an existing line that, as far as we are concerned, Côte d'Ivoire has accepted, based on the interactions we have had over the period. And that is what Ghana referred to as the tacit agreement. So Ghana says there is no need to draw any fresh boundaries. Don't do delimitation. It is not necessary. What you should do as a court is to confirm the boundary that exists between us, first and foremost. The court rejected this argument. I'll go to a few of the things that Ghana canvassed, you know. But Ghana said, well, in the alternative, if you do not confirm that there is an existing line, then in the alternative, we are saying that you can demarcate, but you can demarcate on the basis of a certain principle. And we'll come to that. So, if you like, if you want to use win and lose, round one, Côte d'Ivoire won. I don't want to use win and lose. But what I'm saying is that that argument by Ghana of a tacit agreement was not accepted by the courts. Ghana, in advancing this tacit agreement, said that the oil activities which has taken place over a period of 50 years, I mean, we have been involved in this. And therefore, based on these oil activities and the acceptance, when Côte d'Ivoire wants to do seismic studies, they come to ask permission from us if they want to enter our territory. If we want to enter, we ask permission from them. And therefore, the presumption is that we all agree on a common border. At the end of the day, the court looked at all of this, and the court said, no, look at past decisions. You can also look at Nicaragua, Honduras, Bangladesh, Myanmar. The courts made it quite clear in the Honduras case that, look, oil concessions by themselves do not form maritime boundary. So our position was rejected. Yes, you have had oil concessions, you have drawn maps, etc., but they by themselves alone do not form maritime boundaries. In the outline, we also said that the drilling activities and then the question of protest, we said Côte d'Ivoire had not protested all of these actions over the period, and therefore it amounts to tacit agreement. Ghana went on to show a number of maps, some of which came even from Côte d'Ivoire. And Petrosi themselves said, well, they have moved on from a government organization to a private organization, etc. But the totality of all of it is to say that there is a tacit agreement, you need to prove certain factors. The court listened to all of that and came to the conclusion that Ghana has not proven its case with respect to the tacit agreement. That was the position of the court. Ghana also cited the legislation of the parties. It talked about representation to international institutions, bilateral exchanges and negotiations, other maritime activities, including fishery activities between the two countries, were all cited to support Ghana's case for tacit agreement. And flowing out of tacit agreement is the next doctrine of estoppel. So Ghana canvassed that, look, there is a tacit agreement, and therefore there is a need to respect it. flowing out of that tacit agreement, it does not therefore lie in the mouths of Côte d'Ivoire to now come and reject something which they have accepted for so long. And that is the principle of estoppel. And consequently, the court also, because it has refused the tacit agreement, it had no option than to refuse the estoppel. Because the estoppel flows out of the tacit agreement. We are saying in the estoppel that you cannot, after you have accepted all these years, you have acquiesced, you cannot now come and say that there is no boundary between us. The court said it had rejected all the arguments that were made by Ghana in that respect, and consequently, the estoppel also falls. I must add very quickly that even before Ghana went to the tribunal, it is known, if you review the recent decisions of the various tribunals, the ICJ, ITLOS, etc., it is quite clear that the proof, the standard of proof required of you for saying that there is tacit agreement or for advancing the argument of estoppel is a very, very high standard. And indeed, after all what Ghana put forth, what I take from this decision is that the standard is even higher for countries that would come later to the tribunal. And therefore, they should know that it should be compelling in your arguments if you want to use tacit agreement or estoppel. So tacit agreement, estoppel would not stand. And consequently, what it meant was that there was the need now to go ahead and demarcate the line. I hope so far, so to demarcate. Now, if there is a need to do the delimitation, what are the areas that we are talking about? I must say that in these areas, there was common agreement between Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire that the tribunal should demarcate the line for the territorial sea, for the exclusive economic zone, and also for the continental shelf, and beyond 200 nautical miles. So, in effect, there was common agreement between the parties that this is what we want you to define. So, the court, having been seized with jurisdiction, then went ahead to delineate or demarcate the boundary. And I'm sure those of you who listened, you may have heard a number of things that I believe are so important, but I do not intend to go into the intricacies to confuse you, even though I know that to be a professor, you have to confuse your students a little. I will not go into any intricacies, but just to say that I need to put down the formula first for delimitation. In delimitation, the two parties canvassed different arguments, but at the same time, Côte d'Ivoire, for example, had a fallback position. So as I said, Ghana had earlier on said, if you do not confirm, then demarcate. But if you will demarcate, then you have to use the equidistance principle. And many people have asked me, what is equidistance? And I say, I don't do physics, I do law. The equidistance is normally a line that is drawn from the base points into the sea in order to demarcate the boundaries between the two. And it is more of a line that is perpendicular to the coast. But the other, which is the angle bisector, which is also a perpendicular line drawn, also has what they call an azimuth that turns in a curvature and gives a certain angle. And that is why it's called the angle bisector. So these are two different principles that have been applied. Anyone who has followed keenly the developments over the years will see that there are two discernible periods. The period in which the courts looked at what they call the result-oriented approach as against the corrective equity approach. I'll try and explain that. If you go back, way back in history, when these were being developed, there was in fact controversy. And the whole of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which has been discussed for a period of 10 years, at the time when it was going to be concluded, nearly fell on its head. because of this, because there was a group who were supportive of an equidistance principle, and there were those who were non-supportive of the equidistance. It took the president of the conference to finally take out the word equidistance. So in Article 74 and 83, the words equidistance are no longer in the convention. But that is what happens when you develop international conventions. You live believing that you have taken something away, and the other also believes that it has taken something away. So basically, that was the basis upon which this was determined. Now, let us look strictly at what the rules do say. Ghana canvassed the equidistance principle. And Ghana said, look, for us we have a customary equidistant line. Côte d'Ivoire said, in law, there is nothing like a customary equidistant line. But Ghana said, well, we have coined our own word, but because we know we had this agreement with you. So in terms of the judgment, you will find quite clearly that the courts then now come to see, look, what are the main ingredients in the demarcation of the line? And as I said, if you look at the recent decisions, they show quite clearly that firstly what the court would do is it would draw a provisional equidistant line. And after it has drawn the provisional equidistant line, it will look at whether there are relevant circumstances. If there are relevant circumstances, it would adjust the line. If it adjusts the line, it will then examine whether there is disproportionality. I'll come to explain this, but just so we can sink it in. Just so you know, step 1, step 2, step 3. Normally they call it about a 3-step approach. But I go to the 4th, and I add the 4th, because the end result of all of demarcation is equity. There must be an equitable result. That is the end of it. There must be an equitable result. That is what the court is looking at. So, in 1, you draw the provisional equidistant line. Then, you look at whether there are special circumstances. And you'll find a lot of time was spent on special circumstances, because it is that which would move the provisional equidistant line. So we'll look at some of the special circumstances that was canvassed, especially by Côte d'Ivoire. So from the special circumstances, you would now come to see whether indeed, after drawing the line and looking at the special circumstances, there is disproportionality. If there is disproportionality, you adjust accordingly so that you can obtain an equitable result. If you don't live here with anything, this one, you can live with that one. So you can have an equitable result. So, how then did the court proceed? The special circumstances. Côte d'Ivoire agrees, because Côte d'Ivoire also believes that, look, if you don't accept my bisector angle principle, you can go by the equidistant, but bear in mind that there are special and relevant circumstances. So Côte d'Ivoire brought out a number of special and relevant circumstances. Côte d'Ivoire said, for example, it talked about the instability of the coastline, that the coastline was subject to so much erosion that over a period, it would, when you draw boundaries at a particular place, they may shift because of the erosion, the unstable nature of the coast. And this is one of the relevant circumstances that the courts normally take into consideration. In the case of Honduras and Nicaragua, for example, the courts pointed out that the extensive morphodynamism was such that it was important that they take cognizance of that, because it made the coast very unstable. If you take the case of Ghana, since 1860-something, the maps that were shown, they showed quite clearly between Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, similar maps. Not much change has taken place, and therefore the court rejected the argument of unstable coast. Because, as I said, if the coast is unstable, then it can affect the line which you have drawn already. Côte d'Ivoire also went ahead and talked about what we refer to as the concavity and convexity of the coast. If you look at the map carefully, you'd realize, I didn't know I'll be doing this. I would have had something on the board which I could show you the maps, and then we can relate more closely. But the coast of Côte d'Ivoire is more concave, and the coast of Ghana is convex. And Côte d'Ivoire argued that these are relevant circumstances which the courts should take into consideration in delineating, demarcating the line. The court, however, looked at the concavity of the coast looked at the convexity of the coast and was of the view that these were not pronounced in their character. And to the extent that they were not pronounced, they would not affect the equitable result with the provisional line that has been drawn. And therefore, that argument was also rejected. I'm just looking at the outline to see what the Côte d'Ivoire put forward. Then Côte d'Ivoire also put forward the geography of Jomoro. The geography of Jomoro. You know, Jomoro, it's not an island. Jomoro is part of the landmass of Ghana. But in the demarcation of maritime spaces, projections, low tide elevations, islands, they all have an impact on the way in which the line is drawn. They therefore pointed out that Jomoro was a peninsula. You know, the court, however, rejected the argument that Jomoro is a peninsula and indicated that Jomoro is part of the landmass of Ghana. And consequently, its projection into the sea would follow that line of demarcation, and it will still lead to an equitable result. So Côte d'Ivoire's argument on Jomoro being a peninsula was also rejected. And I think Côte d'Ivoire also said that if you look at the conduct of the parties in terms of the determination of their base points, because the base points are the basis from which you would then draw your line of demarcation. Remember that Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, over the period, they have all agreed on what we call the land boundary terminus, BP 55. So BP 55 was the land boundary terminus, the place where, if you take Côte d'Ivoire, if you take Ghana, that boundary, they all agree on it. And so there was no problem. However, the court said, look, where do we start the demarcation from? Whereas Côte d'Ivoire wanted to extend the area so that in the end they would get more of the space, Ghana wanted it closer to BP 55. The court looked at the argument of both and said, Ghana, we don't buy your argument. Côte d'Ivoire, we don't buy your argument. We think that having regard to the coastline and its near straight nature, it is important for us, therefore, to put the base point at B55 plus. In the French, he said B55 plus. At B55 plus. So B55 plus now becomes the basis upon which the line is drawn. So, having drawn the line based on B55 plus, ITLOS came to the conclusion that having considered all of the relevant circumstances which have been mentioned by Côte d'Ivoire, and having rejected those relevant circumstances, they then became irrelevant circumstances. And so if they became irrelevant circumstances, then it means that the line that has been drawn will stay. If the line that has been drawn, the provisional equidistant line stays, then the question is, does it give an equitable result? So the court would have to look at whether it provides an equitable result. In order to do that, the court has to look at what we call the relevant coastline. Which coastline are we talking about? Côte d'Ivoire extends its coastline all the way to its boundary with Liberia. Whereas Ghana says, no, you cannot. We extend our boundary up to Cape 3 Points. And the court found favor with Ghana's argument in that respect. And therefore, it did not extend that all the way to the border of Liberia with Côte d'Ivoire. Consequently, in the drawing of the line, and looking at Côte d'Ivoire has a much longer maritime coastline than Ghana. The ratios are given. I'm sure if you go back into it, you'll see. But basically, the court was of the view that if you look at the ratio, then it's about 1 to 2, 1.5 to 1 to 2 was the ratio. And therefore, with that kind of ratio, if you drew the line, then you have to look at the entire area encompassed, which was the area of dispute. So if you look at the entire area of dispute, I'm using approximation. I know it's 19 something, but 198 or so, but let me use 2,000. So it makes it very easy for us to keep in our mind. So the area of dispute we are talking about maybe the mass of water, but the water is not the issue in contention. And let me just mention very quickly on the side that Côte d'Ivoire talked about the fact that if the baselines were positioned where they have been positioned at B55 plus, and the likelihood was that there will be a cutoff, and so ships going to Abidjan may even have difficulty in going to Abidjan. The court explained, and quite rightly so, that the character of the waters is different from the character of the land base under the water. So what we could refer to as the superjacent waters, those are free for navigation, and therefore Côte d'Ivoire will not be hindered when it wants to get to Abidjan. So that point is made very clearly. And as I said earlier, if you look at the total area we are looking at, and looking at the two coastlines, and realizing that Côte d'Ivoire has a longer coastline than Ghana. So looking at the relevant coast, and looking at the relevant coast, the court came to the conclusion that when it draws the line, out of the 200,000 square kilometers, Ghana was going to get 66,000 square kilometers, and Côte d'Ivoire was going to get 133,000 square kilometers. So for the ordinary eye, shouldn't Côte d'Ivoire be jumping, you know? But that is not the situation, because as I said, it relates also to the extent of your coastline. And the coastline of Côte d'Ivoire is longer than that of Ghana. So Ghana is 66. Even though it may not meet all of Ghana's aspirations in terms of its quest, it means that Ghana got something more than what Côte d'Ivoire got in respect of what it asked for. I hope I'm clear. I'm talking about what people asked for, what they asked for. So it got, if I put it in very simple and simplistic terms, if Ghana asked for 10, it got 8. If Côte d'Ivoire asked for 10, it got 3. I hope I'm clear. But at the end of the day, it's 3. It's bigger, you know, than Ghana's 8, because it had a longer coastline than Ghana had. So the court, having looked at that, said, look, this provides us with the ultimate end of delimitation. And what is the ultimate end of delimitation? Wait, my students have forgotten. I said equitable result. An equitable result. That is what the courts are looking at. So at the end of the day, the court said there is no disproportionality. Because I told you earlier that if there is disproportionality, then the courts will have to come and adjust the line in order that they will obtain an equitable result. But in this case, it said there is no disproportionality. And therefore, the provisional line that was drawn becomes the accepted equidistant line. And consequently, in the view of the court, it provides an equitable result. Then maybe the last part of Côte d'Ivoire's argument. Côte d'Ivoire, you know, has said that Ghana has encroached upon its territory, and therefore all data, all material that Ghana has gathered over the period should be submitted to Côte d'Ivoire. And that Ghana should also pay compensation to Côte d'Ivoire. You know. And he said Ghana had violated the rights of Côte d'Ivoire in these areas. The court looked at all of these three and came to the conclusion that in the light of what it had done, and having regard to the spaces that have been taken by Ghana, there was no violation. Côte d'Ivoire indicated that the provisional measures, remember earlier on that somewhere in April 2015, Côte d'Ivoire had asked for, if you like, call it an injunction, which were provisional measures to stop Ghana from going ahead with the exploitation of its oil and gas resources. The provisional measures, the order that was given by the court, was to the effect that there should be no new drilling, which means Ghana could go ahead and drill in the places where it was already active. Côte d'Ivoire contended that Ghana had violated the order of the court. The evidence led before the court indicated clearly that Ghana had not violated, the order of the court. And consequently, the court then determined that there was no violation of rights of Côte d'Ivoire as far as the provisional measures were concerned. So, in effect, the court came to a conclusion that it would go by what in recent times has been the way in which the courts have behaved. I must mention that there is no such thing as a binding judicial precedent, so that the decisions of one court are not binding upon another court. Even though those decisions will be cited, they are only of persuasive authority. they are not binding upon the court. But the court referred to a number of cases. And so for a student of maritime delimitation, sitting back and looking at the trend, it is quite clear that this is the way in which the courts have been going over the period. And ITLOS did not depart from the recent decisions that it has itself and the International Court of Justice had ruled upon. So it followed the same principle and came to the conclusion that it has provided for Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire an equitable result. So Cote d'Ivoire gets something, Ghana gets something. Cote d'Ivoire, remember, one strong argument they made, but which was rejected by the courts, was that it looked like the area that Ghana is asking for encompassed the rich resources of the basin, the Tano Basin, and therefore the court should look at, give us something small, Nukufio. But it is a principle of the court that the court will not refashion nature, and that getting an equitable result does not mean equity. Equity does not mean equal. And therefore, it is not there to share so that you get this, but it is there to look at what nature has given to us. So it will not refashion nature. So that argument of Cote d'Ivoire was also rejected. They argued that it means that there will be, if you like, economic loss to their people. Their people will suffer as a result of the demarcation. The court went ahead to say, no, you are not enjoying these resources already. And therefore, you could not be said to be deprived of that resource. And that was the contention which the court put. So all of the arguments which were put forth in this regard, they fell. And so I must say that something that maybe Cote d'Ivoire did not advance strong arguments. Cote d'Ivoire did advance strong arguments to counter the things that Ghana said. Unfortunately, however, Ghana's points were stronger than that of Cote d'Ivoire in terms of the law. And that is why I said before the judgment that when I said Ghana was going to have the decision in its favor, it is not so much because of nationalism, but it is because of the position of the law. And that is what the law has said. So as far as we are concerned, this provides an equitable result. Managing the after effect is something I believe the two countries can look at. So I think I'll stop at this stage, and if there are any questions, I'll be prepared to take them on. So that is how I shed light on this.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Kofi Mbia. We can do better. We can do better. If he were probably in my studio, I still would have asked him, so in the midst of all of this, who won? Yeah, because I think it's one thing that many of us would want to know. But the great thing is that we now have a better understanding of, the ruling of the International Tribunal on Laws of the Sea on the 23rd of September. Before we get to the question and answer segment, we'll give you a chance if you have any question that you want to ask Dr. Kofi Mbia, so he addresses for you. I'd like to, acknowledge representatives from the following institution. Before I do so, I also would like to acknowledge the Group CEO of First Group, Mr. Maoli Hedo. We also have, thank you very much for joining us, sir. And we also have the Group CEO of Media General, comprising TV3, 3FM 92.7, Onia 95.1 FM, Akoma 87.9 FM, and Connect 97.1 FM, Pearl Iswamensa. Thank you very much for joining us, madam. I can also see Beatrice Abe, who is GM TV of the Media General. Thank you very much for joining us. And we have representatives from GNPC, TOR, NPA, BOST, TALO, the Public Interest and Accountability Committee, and also the Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Information. We have the Energy Commission represented here. I have also seen Dr. Steve Mantea, who is Campaigns Coordinator of the Integrated Social Development Center, ISODEC, is also here with us. Thank you very much for joining us. Okay. I am Winston Amwa, and so now time for questions and answers. If you have any question, just show up by hand, and we definitely will get the microphone to you, and then you ask your question, and then Dr. Kofi Mbia will certainly address that question. Okay, so I'm going to get you to come here and ask your questions. This is what I like most. You. I'll get back to you, Johnny Hughes. You'll be later. Yes, you. You. You just come here, you'd ask your question here. You would also come, and you will be the last Johnny Hughes. Okay, so just ask a question, and Dr. Kofi Imbia would address the question to you. Introduce yourself, you tell us where you're coming from, and then you go ahead to ask your question. Come stand here.
Thank you. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. And I want to thank you very much, sir, Mr. Kofi Imbia. My name is Sifasu Usukobi, a member of the Association of Ghana Industries and a student of law. We are celebrating our 60th anniversary as a country. And one thing that I find very interesting is that our first president championed the cause of African unity. And with what I just come up, I'm just thinking, couldn't this have been resolved on the level of the AU? And going forward, what example are we setting for other African countries? Because we know that the coastline of the African continent encompasses about 50 countries. And would that mean that we are also setting the precedent that any issues that come forth should be settled not in Africa but outside by the ITLOS? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your question. Next person. Yes, can you stand here so that once the first person, the first person is done, you also move on and ask your question. You tell us your name and the institution that you represent.
Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Abdul Basit Aziz Bamba of the University of Ghana School of Law. Thank you so much, Doug, for such an insightful elaboration of the judgment. Just two quick questions. Given the clarity, at least to you, of the legal issues involved, it's just a fallback to the question that was asked. Couldn't the two parties just being reasonable in light of issues of neighborliness, African unity, Pan-Africanism, could have resolved this matter? Or because of the issue of resources, the stakes were too high for any amicable settlement? Now, the other issue has to do with the implications of this decision actually for Ghana, Togo. I do understand that Togo is beginning to raise issues about where the proper demarcation of our boundary with them should be. I understand some of the concessions that we have given. People have gone into certain waters, and Togo has raised issues. What lessons do you think we can draw from this judgment, particularly in an attempt to have this seeming issue with Togo resolved as quickly as possible?
Thank you very much. Next person, please.
Thank you so much. My name is James Kwe. Very grateful for the detailed submissions and explanation given. My very simple question is, considering the judgment that came last Saturday, what are the lessons for Ghana as a whole with respect to our total coastal lines, and then the neighboring countries, especially with Togo, and as well as issues surrounding our fisheries? Because the geopolitics nature of these hydrocarbons with respect to countries are so very, very, very delicate. And so should we go on a tangent of legal issue to secure our coastal lines, or it should just be mediated within our neighboring countries? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
My name is Joseph, Media General. Doctor, I would like to find out the argument advanced by Côte d'Ivoire with respect to Jomoro. If Côte d'Ivoire had won that argument, what would have been the implication on the judge's judgment? That's my first question. The second one is, I would like to digress a little. Over the weekend, we heard Mr. Chachu Chikata on this same platform talking about the fact that we need to look beyond this judgment to include the fisheries. I would like to know if how is it possible for the loss of the sea to affect the fisheries in this dimension? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Finally, Johnny Hughes.
Thank you very much. Good morning. The legal processes usually would give a chance for an appeal. does it apply in this instance, you know, the ITLOS judgment? Point number 2 is there have been earlier examples of Cameroon and Nigeria, the Bakassi Peninsula, where the big boys agreed on the legalities and everything else, but the locals still went on and fought. You have been there before. As a matter of precedence, what can we learn from that and what can we do better? Thank you.
All right, so thank you very much, Johnny Hughes, and all of you who have asked questions. Dr. Kofi Imbia, you kindly would answer the questions for us.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'm glad that Dr. Steve Mantea is here. I'm sure he will help me along the line. And I'm also glad that GNPC is here, you know, so it's very useful. I think I'll start from your question. Your question said, who won?
You can decide.
Okay. You know that 2 people can win. So it can be a win-win. No. Okay, that's on the lighter side. The reason why Ghana is a little upbeat about the decision is that all of our resources as far as oil and gas is concerned and where we have drawn our line, they still continue to be in our boundary. Because the fear was that our 10 fields, for example, which Talo was busy now getting involved in it, I think it has so far dug about, if I'm right, about 6 wells. And it has about 13 more wells to drill. And that was going to be in jeopardy. You know, so in effect, that is why Ghana is upbeat about this. So it's about the resources. I think the 2 questions, maybe I could put them into one. Couldn't this have been resolved at the AU? The AU is not the body for resolving maritime disputes or maritime boundary disputes. I need to make all of us understand that to go to the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea is not, if you like, an adversarial thing. It is an agreement between the parties. Both parties, both of us, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, we are party to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. We have subscribed to that convention. By subscribing to that convention, we have said that should there be anything like this, we will come to you, ITLOS, for a resolution. And that is what the parties have agreed on, and that is what they have gone to do. I've said earlier on that Robert Frost, he says, good fences make good neighbors. And so I do not think that this must be thought of in terms of something that is tearing countries apart. Sometimes it is because of the euphoria and the way today, for example, I've heard so many adjectives, you know, Ghana floss Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana trash Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, I mean, those ones are the things that are not really necessary. At the end of the day, it is our resources which we are interested in and which we have been able to claim. Then I think it's about the same thing, including the 2 parties. And then you talk about Ghana-Togo, implications for Ghana-Togo. I think it's important. I know, I think GNPC is here, they will confirm that they are doing some work in the Volta Basin. And when this matter with Cote d'Ivoire came up, the issue of Ghana-Togo also came to the fore. And therefore, it meant that we had to put it on the table and begin to talk. I told you the first cardinal principle in maritime delimitation is agreement between the states. So if the 2 of us are able to agree, then nothing happens. And sometimes it is better for you to start the negotiation at the time when there are no known, if you like, resources in that area. But the moment you begin to discover resources in the area, then tensions heighten and the negotiations become very difficult. So that is something that Ghana should try as much as possible to work on in the coming years or months. Then we talk about lessons for Ghana and also issues surrounding our fisheries. Yes, I think, you know, for us and Cote d'Ivoire, the issue with respect to fisheries has not been very difficult over the period. People have gone to certain places to fish, and they have, over the period, developed historic rights in these areas. There have been 1 or 2 times when people have gone beyond, and therefore they have been chased back into the territory. These things have happened. So I do not envisage that because of this demarcation, there should be anything with respect to our fishery. The same way in which we have operated would continue. Jomoro, if they had accepted the argument of Jomoro, certainly, if they had accepted the argument of Jomoro as being a peninsula, it would have changed the configuration. It would have become a special circumstance, because of which it may mean that they will have to adjust the line. And Cote d'Ivoire was advancing that argument because it was in its favor. If it did, then it was going to encompass more water than it encompasses presently. And that is why Jomoro was relevant. And then any appeal, the decision is binding upon the parties. And you mentioned Nigeria, Cameroon. That's very important because, and even with China recently in the South China Sea, sometimes people look at it and then they say, yes, we agreed, to go to the tribunal, we have gone, but this thing is not working in our favor, and therefore, what do we do? And that is why I talked about management, post-judgment management, and this has happened in the Jan Mayen case. It has happened in Romania, Ukraine, after there is the need for management, and that's important. Today, still, with the Bekasi Peninsula, Nigeria, Cameroon, Nigeria it was more of a land and maritime boundary dispute. Nigeria got more land, but less water, In the end, they have not been pleased, and even in my own interaction with some of them, it's quite clear that even at higher levels, some of them are still not pleased, and so these things would linger on. But as I said, the good thing was that when Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, the judgment was handed down, they all gave indication that they will respect the judgment of the tribunal. It is my hope, as I said, that at high political levels and at our own levels, we'll try and forge that relationship. Everything is not lost. If you look at the judgment, ITLOS pointed out quite clearly that there is still a large mass of water in which Cote d'Ivoire can do a lot of exploration. Sometimes there is the feeling that, if we would have gotten by now, But Ghana, we didn't get all along, and now we have gotten. So technology is improving. We are going into distant areas. We are going into vast waters. We are going to depths, of water, and it should be possible for them also to get something. So I believe it will be important for us to try and manage the post-judgment. All right.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kofi Mbia. Any more questions? Okay, let me also acknowledge the presence of former Deputy Minister in charge of Transport, Joyce Bar Mokhtari. Thank you very much for joining us, madam. Yes, so Kwame Jantua, you would ask a question. I didn't acknowledge you initially. He's also here with us. And then you would also ask a question, and you would also be able to ask your question. All right, so I'll start off with you, Kwame.
Thank you. My name is Kwame Janto, Vice Chairman of PIAC. Now, with hindsight, if we had come to an agreement with Cote d'Ivoire, and we hadn't taken it to court, and the agreement was based on the fact that we would share the 10 field, would we not have shot ourselves in the foot? Because we would have agreed, not knowing that if we had gone to court, the verdict that was given would have favored us. And just to add a bit to what you said with regards to going for appeal. Yes, you are right, we can go for appeal, but they can go for clarity if there's anything in there that, they don't understand with the verdict. But my first question was kind of kicking me, so if you can answer it for us, I'll be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kwame. He definitely would answer that one. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Kofi Asante. I work with the United Press for Development Network. I want to find out, I know you're a lawyer, Doc, how much did it cost? Okay. How much did it cost the ordinary taxpayer in this dispute?
Okay. Thank you very much, Kofi Asante. We'll see about that. Last question.
Thank you. My name is Sandra Thompson. I'm a lecturer in law at the Gimpa Law School. Thank you, Dr. Mbia, for that excellent presentation. I think you achieved your objectives, which is to break it down simply for the ordinary citizenry, and we have understood. It's a small point of law. I was very curious when towards the end of your presentation, you said that the decisions of the chamber are not binding and are only persuasive.
No. Mm-hmm. The decisions are binding upon the parties.
Yes.
They are upon the parties. Okay. I said that previous decisions are not binding upon the present stare decisions.
Okay. All right. That clarifies. So I was going to ask you, vis-a-vis the principle of stare decisis.
Yes.
I'm teaching that to my students now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Okay. Dr. Mbia, you may now address the questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Just to mention very quickly that I was indicating, maybe I did not make myself very clear, that the previous decisions of the International Court of Justice or the International Court of Arbitration or ITLOS are not binding on them in later cases that come before them. However, they are of persuasive authority. But between the parties, it is binding. Maybe I left one small thing out too. One of the things that Côte d'Ivoire also argued was that there was the need for the tribunal to extend the ambit of the relevant coast to cover a larger coastline. I mentioned it briefly with respect to up to Liberia. They were drawing inspiration from the case of Guinea-Bissau. But in Guinea-Bissau, the court made it quite clear that there were complexities, there were low tide elevations, there were islands and things which made it complex. And that is why in Guinea-Bissau, they had to change the formula that they had applied and use the angle bisector. So that distinguished this. So the courts will make an attempt to distinguish, not because it is binding upon them, but when you try to persuade them on that angle, then they will try and distinguish why this one is not on all fours with the other one. My very good friend, Mr. Jantua, talked about what if, that one is crystal ball matter. What if? I think what if is what if, because you know, yeah, it's very important. Today we can sit back and say, but that tells you that maybe it was good, as I have said, for us to have gone to say, look, all of us, and I keep saying, this is not a question of taking someone to court, it's a question of agreement between the parties to take the matter to ITLOS. And so we agreed that, look, we would let ITLOS adjudicate. Côte d'Ivoire accepted the jurisdiction of ITLOS as much as we accepted the jurisdiction of ITLOS. So for me, it's a better approach. Sometimes, if you are able to resolve and you get what you want, you close your eyes. If we got half of 10, and that satisfied us, so be it. But if today we have all of 10, so be it. You know, so I believe that once you have made an effort to try and resolve and you are not getting to any conclusion, the best thing is that adjudicating body that you have all agreed upon is the best arbiter for you to tell you where your lines do lie. And then, what? This is finance. I can't do it.
Okay.
How much does it cost the ordinary taxpayer?
Dr. Kofi Mbia.
That one.
Well, I knew you were not going to do that.
But I do law.
Well,
I don't do finance.
Dr. Mantia is here, and he will do that.
Yeah.
Because speaking to him this morning on 3FM's morning show, Sunrise, he talked about how much was spent. But I said I wasn't going to ask any question, but just before I came here, someone drew my attention and said, when you spoke to Dr. Tonyedu, he made a point that all this conflict, this dispute, has been facilitated by multinational companies. And that left to us, and we probably would have sorted this out long ago. From where you stand...
Indeed, it's not accurate, so to say.
Okay.
I must say, because you see, you have to look at, even appearing before ITLOS. You know, if you're not careful, there was this word Beshi or something like that. You know, you probably, yes. You have to develop a certain culture of the court. You know, you have to be led by others. So bringing in others to team up, because we have a lot of experts from Ghana. All of them were part of the team. They met various times. There were cartographers, there were scientists, there were meteorologists, there were so many, all spectrum of people. I can talk about maybe 18 distinct fields that needed to come together, because some of which I would not understand. Because when they put the map there and they show the depth of the waters and they talk about cutoff and all that, and now it is turning to mathematics.
Okay.
So certainly, I would say that it was good that we had a partnership of both local and foreign. And remember that there are foreign interests in the oil and gas. Look, at the end of the day, if Ghana had lost Tullow Oil, we would just have done this and shifted to Côte d'Ivoire and worked there, because they are only for the resources. That is what is happening anywhere. So for us, it is good that they are stationed here, and now the fields that we talk about are still within our maritime domain. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kofi Mbia. So, Dr. Mantiao, maybe finally, you want to talk about the cost of it, or we let it go? Or you have a question?
I'm pretty sure.
Or just come for the microphone, Dr. Steve Mantiao. I know you have an opinion on all of this, and that's how come I invited you. So you can, tell us what your view is. Yes, Dr. Steve Mantiao.
Yeah, I'm really sure we'll be counting the cost. As of 2016, we've spent something close to $3 million on this litigation. And this money has come from GNPC's allocation for exploratory activities, something I found problematic. It means monies that could have gone into exploration have been spent on litigation. In my view, to the extent that this is a litigation between two states, the financing should have come from government's own resources. And if even GNPC was advancing money, it should have been on the basis of an agreement to refund the money to GNPC so they can use the money for the purpose for which it was approved by Parliament and allocated to it in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's why I invited you. So I know there are some of you who might disagree. We'll continue later. I mean, after the whole event comes to a close, we'll still continue. At this moment, would invite the Chairman, Justice Emil Short, for his closing remarks.
Sorry? I can go ahead, okay. I think you will all join me in thanking Dr. Mbia for the clarity that he has brought to the judgment. I listened to the judgment when it was being read, and afterwards I listened to a number of analysis on radios, and I think your presentation was a lot more logical and clear than everything I heard. Listening to the reading of the judgment on radio, as you pointed out, the argument of Ghana on tacit agreement and estoppel were rejected. And those came in the beginning, so I lost a heartbeat. I thought this was all going against Ghana. But as the judicial process is, there are a number of issues that have to be determined. So as the reading of judgment went on, I realized that a lot more issues were in favor of Ghana. For all of us here, at least there are a few things that you should remember. Tacit agreement, estoppel, special circumstances, equidistance line, and equity. If you remember those, and Jomoro, if you remember those, you would have clearly understood the judgment. The only one question I would like to ask you is that I understand that the cartographers still have to go on and do some plotting. Is that correct?
Well, I do not know whether, because the decision itself pointed out the line. What they may have to do is to see exactly what is physically on the ground, but I do not know how soon that will be done.
All right, okay. All right, so on that note, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming. It's been a very instructive and useful lecture, and we hope that we'll be having a lot more of these lectures in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Justice Emil Short, Chairman for this occasion. Well, like the General Manager in charge of news said, we'll have more of these so that you get to understand issues that bother your mind. I definitely would want to thank all of you who made it here, the representatives from the GNPC, TOR, NPA, BOST, PIAC, Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Information, Dr. Steve Mantiao, and particularly to you, Kwame Jantua, for joining us, Mr. Mauli Hedo, Pelis Ramensa, Beatrice Abe, Kojo Akakwating, I didn't mention you earlier on. Thank you very much, head of station for Onya FM, and all of you who made time to join us. My name is Winston Amwa. Thank you all for coming, and we definitely will do this another time. God richly bless you all.